All right, for our next exercise, we're going to extend our database and add a few more tables. So currently we have only implemented the users table. Next, I want you to create a migration and create the profiles table. In this table, we have a few columns: ID, bio, phone number, date of birth, and loyalty points. Now, all these columns are optional, so they should be nullable. For loyalty points, we want to give it a default value of 0, and we want to make sure that this is a positive or an unsigned integer. Now here we have an ID column, and the value stored in this column is exactly the value we store in the ID column of the users table. Because look at the relationship. Here we have a one-to-one relationship between users and profiles. So each user has one and only one profile, and each profile belongs to one and only one user. So when populating these tables, first we create a record in the users table. This is where we use the auto increment attribute, so the ID is automatically generated by the database. But once we have an ID, we use the same ID to create a profile for that user. Next, we have the tags table. I want you to implement this in a second migration. So in the second migration, create a table for tags. Here we have two columns, ID and name. And as you can see, we have a many-to-many relationship between users and tags. So here's our join table, user tags with two columns, user ID and tag ID. So here we have a composite primary key with two columns. Now each of these columns is also a foreign key. Now, if these concepts are foreign to you, I highly encourage you to take my SQL course, because these are basic relational database concepts you have to know to build Spring Boot applications. So for this exercise, I want you to create two migrations, one for profiles, the other for tags. Spend about 20 minutes on this and then come back and see my solution. All right, here's what I have done. In my first migration file, we have a statement for creating the profiles table with these columns. ID, which is defined as a big int because we use the same type in the users table. And this is our primary key. Then we have bio, which is defined as text, phone number, which is a varchar of 15. Now we could also use varchar of 255 for consistency, but in this case, I prefer to use a shorter length because it doesn't really make sense to have a long phone number. Then we have date of birth, which is a date, because here we don't need a time component, so we use the date type. And finally, we have loyalty points, which is defined as int, unsigned, so it's positive, and we have given it a default value of 0. Now, in this table, we have a foreign key on the ID column that references the ID column in the users table. So this is the script we need for creating the profiles table. How we create this script is irrelevant. You might prefer to use a visual tool, or you might prefer to use Chat GPT, or you might prefer to hand code this from scratch. This is entirely up to you. Next, we have another migration file for creating the tags table. In this file, we have two statements, one for creating the tags table with these two columns, ID, which is defined as int, auto increment, and is the primary key, and name, which is a varchar of 255 and is not null. Then we have a create table statement for creating our join table. Here we have two columns, user ID and tag ID. User ID is big int because that's the type we used in the users table, right? Now here we have a composite primary key on two columns, user ID and tag ID. And we also have two foreign keys, one on the user ID, the other on the tag ID, referencing the corresponding columns in the users and tags tables. Now, for both these foreign keys, we have onDelete cascade. So if we delete a record in the users table, the corresponding records in the user tags table will be automatically deleted. Again, this is one of the basic relational database concepts you need to be familiar with in order to take this course. So now let's run these migrations and make sure everything works. So here in the Maven window, migrate. Beautiful. Let's look at our database. Refresh. Now we have 6 tables. There you go. Hopefully you had no problem going through this exercise, but if something didn't work on your machine and is different from my implementation, I encourage you to check out the commit for this lesson and use the same code as me on your machine so you won't encounter any issues going forward in the course.